Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome very much to the 2022 virtual conference of the East Africa Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement, EANECE. I will be your moderator today, stepping in for Mr. Orina, who is not able to actually carry out the moderation, even though he will be joining us. So at this point in time, allow me to welcome Madam Salome Machua, Deputy Director, Environmental Compliance and Enforcement at NEMA, Kenya, to be able to give us the opening remarks on behalf of Director Mr. David Ongare. Welcome, Madam Salome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Opondo, and good afternoon and welcome members in the forum. And I'm grateful to see all of you virtually and feel welcome to this very important forum for our region. I just want to say a few things as our opening remark and say that the East African Network for Compliance and Enforcement is an important tool for us as a region to enhance our collaboration and our partnership within this East African region to ensure that our environment is managed and protected in a more harmonized way. And I want to say that I'm one of the people who is quite very excited that we are reviving this network because it's key in the way we do our things in the region, enhancing the management and protection of our environment. And I want to recognize that this network has no borders, that it's a network for all the managers, regulators of environment. We also welcome non-governmental organizations, the private sector. The private sector, the people we normally regulate, researchers to guide us in emerging issues, the academias. So it's quite a rich network, and it's my duty this afternoon to encourage all of us to participate and collaborate in this network, get more people, get other players, stakeholders in this environmental management to join, to be part of this network. And some of the benefits that we reap from this kind of network, and that's what makes my joy, is that we call ourselves as a compliance network, compliance and enforcement. And so under compliance, we set standards, we set rules, we set guidelines. And you can imagine as a region, if we set standards in this that we need to comply, so that our region will be managed, our environment within the region is managed in a standardized manner, in a harmonized manner. And when we come to enforcement, then we are also saying as a region, this network will also be promoting consistency in how we enforce our laws, our rules, our guidelines, our procedures. And so we will have a harmonized way of doing things. We will not have people running away from Kenya because maybe our enforcement is more stringent, or running from Uganda to come to Kenya, or Rwanda, or Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda. We will be speaking from the same language. And so it's also a forum where we can share experiences, lessons learned. And there's this saying, this popular saying that says we don't have to reinvent the wheel. If there's an experience in one of our state parties, we can share in this forum. And so we are able to manage our resources and properly. So all these collaboration, partnership, we can resource mobilize for the region, and all this will be beneficial to all of us. So as we revive this network, this very important network, as we continue to deliberate on how, on the way to move forward and even get to greater heights, I want to wish all of you a fruitful discussion, a dialogue, and feel free to participate, share any lessons learned, and feel free to just participate on an equal platform. So thank you very much, Mr. Opondo, for again jacking ourselves to start this network. And with these few or many remarks, I wish to welcome all of you and wish you a good afternoon. Karibuni sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Salome, for those opening remarks. So I'll just quickly, first of all, set, some ground rules, just for purposes of smooth running of the program. So for purposes of order, I would request that all of us do keep our microphones on mute, unless and until it is our opportunity to be able to speak. And then from there on, I think I'll just proceed to give straight away the objectives of this particular conference. Those of you who followed EANECE over the last couple of months, you may already be aware that there have been lots of efforts regionally to revive and re-energize this particular network. And those efforts have been led by various stakeholders across the region, and more particularly the environmental regulatory agencies such as NEMA Kenya, NEMA Uganda, NEMC in Tanzania, REMA in Rwanda, the Pollution Control Office in Burundi, and all that. And we, as the Environmental Compliance Institute, have just been providing, facilitative role and secretariat role to just make sure that everybody comes together for this particular dialogue. And where we are is that we have, in the past 6 months, held 3 capacity building webinars, one being on the subject of air quality and climate change policy and legislation around East Africa. The second one was about biodiversity and ecosystems. And the last one, which we held last week, was on the subject of waste and chemicals, and particularly exploring the issue of extended producer responsibility as a possible tool for tackling the plastic waste menace in the region. And with all these capacity building efforts, we've then realized that, there is increased and new interest from the region to actually, have this network going once again. And with that, then we, as the conveners of these previous efforts, have determined that it is now time that, therefore, we involved the membership more and more in decision making, as well as in management of the affairs of the network. So in terms of the program, therefore, today we are going to hear more a little bit about the network itself, what it is, where did it come from, how did it come about, and I'll be giving you that presentation shortly. And then thereafter, you will hear a little bit about the capacity gaps and needs related to environmental compliance and enforcement in East Africa. This is an assessment that we as ECI have been carrying out over the past 3 months. And the results are still preliminary, but nevertheless, we'll be able to present to you what we have and also hear your feedback. Tomorrow, same time, same link as you have used today, will be now the time for what I would usually want to refer to as the owners of the network. And the original owners of the network were actually the environmental regulatory agencies in East Africa. And we will be granting you, as the regulators, the opportunity to, determine which way forward should the network take in terms of governance, in terms of priority activities, and all that. So once that happens, then we also hope that tomorrow we can establish an interim steering committee of the region that can then work with us to take next steps as we rejuvenate the network. And we hope that, by the end of the day tomorrow, we should also have a clear way forward in terms of how then do we proceed from here. So we hope you'll stay on today and can also stay on tomorrow when those, real decisions about where we take the network next happens tomorrow. So allow me to share my screen and just share with you a little bit about the background of the network. I hope you can now see my screen. Are you able to see it clearly?
Yes.
Thank you very much. So in the next couple of minutes, I'll just do a quick overview of the East Africa Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement. And then we can take some quick Q&A before we go to the next presentation. So as an introduction, EANECE is basically an informal network. It's an informal common dialogue and action platform among local, national, and regional, as well as international environmental governance institutions, as well as practitioners in East Africa. And when I talk about East Africa, I talk about the countries that make the treaty-based East Africa community, basically in alphabetical order: Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, and you can see there Tanzania and Zanzibar. I am happy that NEMC is here. So some people may be wondering, why am I saying Tanzania and Zanzibar? Mainly because if you look at the Union Treaty for mainland and mainland Tanzania and Zanzibar, then there are certain matters that are outlined as not union matters. Colleagues, kindly let us mute our microphones so that we can have an orderly procedure. So between Tanzania mainland and Zanzibar, environmental matters are not union matters. And that's why you will find there is the National Environment Management Council in mainland Tanzania with a law applicable to the mainland. And if you go to Zanzibar, then you have the Zanzibar Environmental Management Authority. So that's why, for purposes of the network, we have them as two, but in essence, it's actually, the United Republic of Tanzania. And then we have Uganda. So we hope that, in the not so long future, we can expand the reach of the network to Ethiopia. They have previously participated in some of our activities, and also South Sudan, that is part of the East Africa community. And lately, you may have followed efforts by the Democratic Republic of Congo to also join the East Africa community. And we hope that soon, when that happens, we could also have them as part of the network. Now, the point I want to stress is that the network is informal, basically meaning that it is not based on any treaty or a formal agreement signed by the countries that form the membership of the network. Rather, people came together as environmental regulators, sat down, discovered they had common objectives and common issues, and agreed on a mechanism for cooperation through a document that was signed in Nairobi in the year 2010 called the Charter, but it is a non-legally binding charter, and therefore that's why the informality comes in. Now, in terms of the origin of the network, this can be traced to the 8th conference of the International Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement. So Some of you may already be aware that there is indeed an international network on environmental compliance and enforcement based in Washington, DC, in the US. And their 8th conference was held in Cape Town in the year 2008. Africa was very well represented from all the regions of the continent at this conference. And during this particular conference, and I'm glad Madam Salome of NEMA Kenya is here, because I know she was one of the people who attended that particular conference. I was not there myself. But I know, like, for example, from Tanzania, Engineer Bonaventure Baya, former Director General of NEM, was there. Dr. Robert, may God rest his soul in peace, was there. In Uganda, Dr. Ariamanya, the former Executive Director of NEMA Uganda, was there, you know, so with many. And having experienced what was happening at the international level, the participants at this international conference determined that it was actually necessary also to have a network for Africa. And for that matter, it was also discovered that there was already an existing network for the Northern Africa region and Maghreb. And therefore, they decided to form what they called then a Sub-Saharan network for environmental compliance and enforcement. Now, with the Sub-Saharan network, then what happened was that they divided it into the sub-regions. So there was the sub-region of East Africa that was supposed to be coordinated by NEMA Kenya. And then there was the Central Africa sub-region, the West African one, and I think the Southern African one. Unfortunately, after this particular conference, as usual, not much happened. And therefore, the Sub-Saharan network never really got to take off. But sometime in the year 2010, NEMA Kenya. Hello, colleagues. Kindly let us mute our microphone, please.
YAMC.
Kindly let us mute, please. Thank you. So in around the year 2010, NEMA Kenya led the efforts to now establish the East Africa Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement. And with funding from the Danish government through DANIDA, they were able to actually mobilize members from the East Africa region. And in May of 2010, I remember we held the first regional conference in Nairobi at the UN Environment Headquarters. And that's where a resolution was made to establish this particular network. And just to remind you that EANECE is a member of the International Network for Environmental Compliance and Enforcement to date. So moving forward, I just want to share with you what the mission, vision, and goals of the network are. So the vision of the network is a clean and healthy environment secured through enhanced legal frameworks and institutional capacities in East Africa, with a mission to promote innovative interventions to enhance capacity of regulatory institutions, as well as other stakeholders, to develop, implement, and enforce environmental laws. And with this, what we actually purpose to do is to promote regional integration and harmonization of environmental laws and regulatory programs. The other goal is to build capacity of environmental agencies and other stakeholders for environmental compliance and enforcement. And also to provide a platform for sharing of information between the various agencies on environmental governance issues. And finally, to strengthen relationships among members. I was just saying, the final goal is to strengthen relationships among members in order to improve cooperation on both in-country as well as cross-border environmental issues. So in terms of strengthening relationships, for example, what we discovered is that when people know each other, then working together becomes, very, very easy, rather than when people don't know each other. And at in-country level, for example, if the regulator and maybe the lead agencies responsible for different sectors have some kind of personal relationship, then it's easier to work together than, for example, trying to work through formal mechanisms, writing letters and all that. And I believe these are some of the things that will be shared tomorrow. Yes, so in terms of governance, when we set up the network in the year 2010, we set up a 3-tier governance framework. So we had what we called an executive committee at a regional level. And this was the body that would be in charge of overall strategic direction of the network. At the time that we set up the network, it was agreed that the respective directors in charge of environmental compliance and enforcement in the various environmental regulatory agencies in the region would be the members of this particular committee. And therefore, as a start, for example, we had Dr. Robert from NEMC in Tanzania. We had Mr. Benjamin Langwen from NEMA, Kenya. We had Waiswa from Uganda, and I'm happy Waiswa is still with us to date. And we had, I think, Adela from Burundi, and Remy also from Rwanda. And some of them are no longer in their respective agencies. And therefore, that's part of the work that we have to do to try and revitalize this particular committee. Then we also had the next level, which was basically working below the executive committee. And this was the level of the national coordinators or focal points. So these are the people who would be in charge of day-to-day coordination of the network within each country. And you can see there in the slide, I'm referring to in-country coordination of national chapters. So what we did in the agreement in 2010 was that we would have the regional network with a secretariat, but then we would have each environmental regulatory agency, NEMA here, NEMA Uganda, NEMC in Tanzania, etc., being the coordinating agency for the national chapter. So the national chapter would then be spearheaded by the agency, but would comprise of the agency and lead agencies, as well as other partners such as academia, relevant NGOs, and the like. And then there was the last element of the governance framework in the form of a secretariat. Currently, we, as the Environmental Compliance Institute, is providing the secretariat services pro bono, basically meaning, we are not being paid by anybody to facilitate or convene or, reach out for this. We have, at the time that we set up the network, the secretariat was established at the National Environment Management Authority of Kenya, that is NEMA. It happened then that at that point in time, I was also, working and based at NEMA. And, so when I moved on to other things, including what I do today, then somehow the network also got into a bumpy ride. And that's why now, as an institution, we decided to try and spearhead, this revival before engaging you as, the original owners of the network, and then, seeing then how can you be more involved in day-to-day affairs as well as decision-making regarding, the strategic direction of the network. So the Secretariat basically does the day-to-day coordination, is responsible for designing and delivery of programs of work in consultation with the national chapters, as well as the executive committee that I've just pointed out up there. So these are some of the past achievements that I want to highlight. So we did, in 2010, develop a 3-year action plan that ran up to 2013. And this action plan actually did outline the agreed priority areas of action for the region and the activities that the network would engage in for that particular period. We also did establish, we began the process of establishing national networks, and we did establish a national network in Kenya that was housed or coordinated by NEMA Kenya under the leadership of Mr. Robert Orina as the national focal point. Then we also established a national network for Tanzania under the National Environment Management Council. By then, I think was led by Engineer Ruth Lugwisha, if I remember well. And then working closely with Dr. Roberts. And in Uganda, we also did set up in 2011 a national network for Uganda that was, whose focal point, I think, was, if I remember well, I think it was Mr. Dick Lufaka of NEMA. He's no longer with NEMA, working very closely with his director, Waiswa, who we are very lucky is still here with us. And we were not, lucky enough to be able to establish a national network for Burundi and for Rwanda. But now that we are in efforts of revival, I think, that's something that needs to be considered as we go forward. We did engage in various capacity building efforts for better implementation and enforcement of environmental laws and regulations. Some of you may have attended, for example, courses like, the principles of environmental compliance and enforcement at a regional level. This particular course is a strategic course that we adapted to the situation of East Africa, working very closely, with the US environmental protection agencies. And we are very happy, that NEMA Kenya, for example, took up this as part of their capacity building programs. And we are glad that they still run this as one of their courses for compliance and enforcement staff. Other courses that we did deliver, for example, were related to environmental inspections, as well as kindly mute colleagues, please. We also, offered courses like, performance measurement for environmental compliance and enforcement programs. For example, if you are a regulator, and I know the way government works, we work with, annual work plans. For purposes of delivering our mandate of improving environmental quality, how, for example, do we know that we are achieving success? Is it, for example, by the number of inspections that go out there, or can we have better ways of measuring? So these are some of the kind of the courses that we used to run both nationally and also, in the region. We did a lot of awareness around the issue of compliance and enforcement, and also worked, jointly as East Africa to unify some of the tools that then help, environmental inspectors to do their work much better. So one of the premier documents that we were able to come up with way back, I think in 2012, was the Harmonized Environmental Inspection and Investigation Manual for East Africa. This was printed in hard copy, but is also very much available in PDF as a download, a free download from the EANECE website. We also did work again closely with environmental agencies across East Africa to develop an investigation and safety manual for inspectors, so that when inspectors goes out into the field, what sort of hazards should they expect? What sort of safety measures should they consider? And some of these are also available online. There was enhanced information and intelligence sharing among participating institutions. I remember Mr. Rina used to do lots of this with other agencies in Kenya. I hope he'll be able to share some of that. And then we also held various conferences and workshops and forums that ran at a regional level. And I remember the last one was in the year 2015 in Naivasha, where we had what we called the East Africa Environmental Regulatory CEOs Forum, where the leaders of the NEMAs, NEMC, and others of the region would come to share, strategic cooperation issues, and better ways of working together. However, at some point, I think around the year 2016, thereabouts, the network did run into some headwinds in terms of funding and sustainability. The main source at that point in time was donor-based. And when donor support started dwindling, then I think we ran into this sort of headwinds. We also experienced the problem that among the participating institutions as well as countries, the level of commitment in this informal network was not the same. There were varied levels of commitment. So some countries and some institutions were very active, while others were a bit, lukewarm. And that actually, affected some of the vibrance of the network. Now, another challenge that hit us hard, I think, was the transition of what I call key champions of the network, as well as, lack of institutional memory. In Tanzania, for example, we lost a key champion, Dr. Robert, who went to be with the Lord. In other institutions and countries, people retired, people changed institutions. And then we discovered that in terms of institutional memory, when these people left the scene, then it was a bit difficult to pick up and move beyond that. So we hope, going forward, these are some of the things that we can work around. And then, of course, with the lack of funding that I mentioned above, there was no dedicated secretariat, therefore, to keep the affairs of the network running. And at some point, like I mentioned, for example, when I moved out of NEMA Kenya, then there was a bit of a lull in terms of the activity of the network. So some of the discussions that we should have around this today and tomorrow is basically how then do we get a secretariat that is vibrant, that is able to proceed and keep the fire burning. And finally, political dynamics within the region. And I don't want to delve into this very much, but sometimes, the politics of the region and the diplomatic relations sometimes flare within the region, and therefore this, in a way, also affected participation in the network. Going forward, as I said, over the past 2 years, we have, as an interim and pro bono secretariat, worked very hard to set priorities for the network. We did consult with colleagues in the region. And it was determined that over the next 5 years, we should focus our work around the issues of climate change and air quality, chemicals and waste, as well as biodiversity and ecosystems. And we are hoping that working with the agencies, we can then break down this into now real activities around these areas that can be points of regional cooperation. So for that matter, we have come up and established a strategic plan for the years 2020 to 2025. It has, of course, faced a bit of headwinds with the COVID-19 pandemic, so it's taken a bit of time to get it off the ground in terms of implementation, but here we are. We have a fundraising and sustainability strategy that supports strategic plan implementation, as well as a communication strategy. And some of these documents have been shared with the key leadership of the institutions that form the membership of the network. So colleagues, briefly, that's a brief overview of the network, how we came about, where we are. And I want to stop the presentation here and possibly take a few questions before we move to the next session. Thank you very much. So you may raise your hand, or you may actually, just go ahead and mute yourself and ask any questions or comments, please. Thank you. Yes, Waiswa.
I think I just want, I want to be asking a question, but as one of the veterans and remaining veteran from those who started this network, first of all, I want to thank you very much for convening this meeting. Despite the challenges you have faced of lack of funding, you've held this network in your briefcase everywhere. Even when you didn't have a home, you moved it to your home and housed it there to ensure that the network is still alive. So really, I want to thank you very, very, very much by the fact that you have continued to babysit this network, because I recall the time when the funding ended, because the donors we had, EPA and others who also used to pay a salary for you, who used to pay you a salary, all disappeared. And there you were left with a network. Yourself, you had no job, but nonetheless, you managed to carry it, and you have carried it and managed to even babysit. And the question that you have developed the programs using resources mobilized from elsewhere to ensure that the network keeps alive. Indeed, like you mentioned, this network was very, very, very critical when we formed it. You've talked about the issues of training and capacity building. Indeed, some of our staff and inspectors benefited a lot from the capacity building programs. Even in Uganda, we have continued whenever we have our inspectors training, in that we do one of the presentations or modules we give is that of environmental compliance and enforcement, which we adopted from our network. So we are still continuing with this. In fact, what you mentioned, the issue of transiting of some of the people who started this network, it has affected the network. And more so, in order to have a new buy-in, I would propose that you could arrange a meeting of the CEOs. First of all, since you don't have funding, initially let it be virtual. It could be a 2 hours meeting, 3 hours meeting for the CEO of the region, because like you said, we have new people who don't know even about the network and even its importance. So for them to be able even to commit resources, to commit staff, they must understand really the background, this is importance, and to be able to commit resources. So that is very, very critical. But I must also say that Uganda has remained active on this. In sharing information and knowledge, you know, we had time, in Uganda one time, maybe 5 years ago, we had invited inspectors from because we used to have annual inspectors training, and we had invited inspectors from other member countries, was mainly Kenya, Tanzania, and Rwanda, to send in some participants. And this was, we thought that this would be a way of sharing experience in the way we conduct inspector training, and also increase on our, you know, our networking. But of course, since it had not been planned before by many of the countries, so that it didn't happen. But you know, through this network, we also came to know each other. We grew together and became very close friends, especially those of us in the executive committee. For members, just let you know that through this network, my late colleague Robert sent his 3 children to Uganda, and they were staying with me as they went to school. But this came out just because of the network. So the network is not just only about talking about enforcement, but the network also has other factors and other relationships that emerge, you know, and are good for the region. You talked about this harmonized manual on compliance and enforcement. Unfortunately, for the time it was developed, I think it's when funding was reducing. So there was never a time when we again came back together, probably to train our people on this manual. So I think as we go forward in our strategic plan, and also as we look for funding, it could be one of the things that we could look into. But also, I know, Fondo, you've been interacting a lot with UNEP. Probably you could also find out from Mr. Frank Triatunga and Mr. Charles Sebukera. They talked of UNEP trying to arrange a forum for all CEO of EPAs in Africa. Now that we have ours already existing in the region, you could see how we can tap into that, even maybe some funding for the virtual meeting, because the virtual could introduce, but I think it would be useful at some stage when funding has been obtained, to have the CEOs meet face to face. I want to thank you very much. Probably, as I said, many people don't know me. Maybe I should have turned on the video so that some people can see my face. I'm on leave and at home, so people may not be able to see me very well, but probably there will be an opportunity when that will happen. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Waiswa, for those very, very good comments. We do appreciate. Colleagues, the floor is still open for any questions, comments about the network and its activities, its past, and going into the future.
Yes, thank you, Bana Obondo. I also want to join my colleagues really to say thank you so much for this forum. As a network, I will also join my colleagues, especially the director from Uganda, to say that this is one of those best initiatives that we started as a region. And it gave us an opportunity even to share a lot of issues. The achievements you have highlighted actually went a long way to assist our region in terms of how we conduct our inspections. And as a country in Kenya, some of those tools, we have internalized them in our systems, like the principles of compliance and enforcement is become one part and parcel of the trainings that we conduct annually for all our staff. We have managed to train almost all the inspectors in the counties and the headquarters. Now we are training actually the county inspectors, where we have done about 3 counties so far. And the feedback we are getting from especially these counties we have trained is that this is one of the best trainings in terms of its practicability and the way the approach it's given. So I want really to appreciate the network for having built such a tool. including the manuals that we were able to produce that are being used by our institution. Again, through the partnerships, especially the local chapter, we have continued struggling, of course, to maintain some kind of network. One such that we managed to internalize is also one of the cleaner production center in the country, where we are carrying on several compliance assistance programs. So far, we've continued to do the same through internal funding, and sometimes when we have got external funding, we utilize it, and it has also gone a long way to assist compliance and enforcement, especially with the industries, to see that apart from the normal enforcement initiatives, then we can also provide some technical assistance in that. So from that, I see that reviving this network or making it vibrant is going to really give us a better strategic position as a network to be able to even channel out more programs. And from last year, we have tried to activate the local network. We have had a meeting with the various agencies involved with the environmental matters, and the reception has been very good. The other issue I want also to appreciate, especially the topical areas that we have had for the last, I think, 1 week or 2 weeks on biodiversity and plastic issues. Which have also now provided some of the engagement that we can work with the team locally. So basically, I want just to underscore that Kenya as a chapter, we are eagerly waiting to see how we can still activate this network and be able even now to learn from each other. As was said, we used to really get a lot of experiences from other countries, especially Tanzania and Uganda, in terms of their regulatory framework and how they are also going through some of the challenges. You know, environment agencies, we work in a very political environment, and therefore we need to learn, especially on soft ways of how to enforce without necessarily probably confronting the political environment. So that's my take, and I want to really congratulate the Secretariat, especially you, Bondo, who has not given up despite that you operating from a private position. I think I will recommend that even those officers whom we have left, who have left the institution like Langwen, if they can also be gotten through, I hope there is no limitations in terms of co-opting some of the members, because we can benefit from their knowledge. So thank you very much. That's my comment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rina. And indeed, you know, this is, as I said, you know, informal network, free for all who share, you know, similar aspirations. So whether as institutions or as individuals, I think anybody who has a role within the space of environmental compliance and enforcement and environmental governance generally, you know, should actually be part of this. And, you know, we look forward to even having more and more. And some of the things that we'll be exploring tomorrow during the plenary session is, you know, like the model of membership. How do we model the membership of the network? So we look forward to that tomorrow. Thank you. Any more comments? I will take one or two before I hand it over to the next session. So silence means that we are good so far. And we thank you very much for your attention. So allow me to transition you now to the next and final presentation for today. So as I did mention when we were starting, we are going to present to you a summary of findings from a capacity gaps and needs assessment that we did in relation to environmental compliance and enforcement in East Africa. I already mentioned about the strategic plan and the 3 strategic areas of priority, that is climate change and clean air, biodiversity and ecosystems, and chemicals and waste. And one of the strongest pillars of the network is actually capacity building. So we thought, that before we can actually go ahead and design capacity building programs going forward, we needed to understand what the situation is within the region. So what you are going to hear in the next presentation are the preliminary findings of this study. So we carried out that study as ECI, coordinating with the colleagues. But again, due to the limitations of the COVID pandemic, we were not able to go into the ground, and speak to people all over East Africa. But nevertheless, we hope we can get some feedback on those preliminary findings as we move forward to then finalize the report that will eventually form the basis of the priority capacity building efforts for EANECE as we go forward. So to make this presentation is going to be my colleague at ECI, Dr. Godwin Opinde, who also happens to be a lecturer at Kenyatta University. And we've worked with him and other colleagues to put together this report. So he'll just be giving you some snippets of the preliminary findings. So welcome, Godwin.
Thank you, Jerry, for this opportunity to present some of the findings. My object for presenting this is actually to spur a discussion, which is the second session after this, on the challenges and gaps, especially on the 3 priority areas. So even as you follow through, I'm speaking to those who are involved in day-to-day activities that in issues of compliance and enforcement that actually target those areas. And so the discussion will enrich this. And just to start us off, it's just important for us to appreciate. So for the presentation, I'm just going to do a background and then snippets of challenge identified, and then just few recommendations. And I believe that more of the challenges and also recommendations come from the floor. So we do appreciate that environmental challenges actually restrict economic development, and not only in the EAC region, but globally. And we know that these challenges do inhibit the meeting of growing global human population. For us to be able to meet the needs, these challenges actually inhibit us. And so that collective and cooperative response by various actors, which actually is the bedrock for the discussions today, is very critical to achieve effective governance, which leads to sustainable future. And EANECE, has already been said, offers that platform so that we realize this cooperation within East Africa. I'll belabor a little bit on the strategic plan and the priority areas for the next 5 years. The priority areas is working on the nexus between climate change and air quality. How then do we minimize the adverse impact of chemicals and waste, and then protecting biodiversity and ecosystem? So as Jerry has mentioned, there is a study ongoing on capacity gaps and needs, which related to compliance and enforcement of these priority areas. And the objective of that study, or objectives, first is to assess the enforcement mechanisms related to EANECE 3 priority topics, and also to analyze effectiveness of existing policy, legislative, and institutional framework. But for this meeting, I'm just going to present to you some of the gaps and the challenges that we did identify preliminary. And I know through your contribution, we're going to enhance this. One of the challenges that's generic, you'll realize that my presentation will be generic because, I mean, it will be more overall because I'll be cross-cutting 3 thematic areas, so I'll not be very specific, but just give the general challenge or gap. So the segmented national policies and laws, which actually sometimes, in most cases, lead to overlaps and conflicts. And I believe as compliance and enforcement officers, you have experienced this, where you have some scattered institution responsibilities, and it becomes a challenge when you want to do some enforcement. And I'd give an example of air quality standards. We have various institutions involved, as much as KEBS is the lead, but then in that process, sometimes it becomes a challenge. Also still with air quality, like Kenya, the constitution has actually devolved the function of air quality county government, but there's still a challenge there in terms of should NEMA have it, should county have it? That clarity is still lacking, and that's a challenge, and sometimes it brings issues and conflicts in the enforcement. And that's just on air quality, and many others are also facing such kind of challenge, many other priority areas. So inadequate mechanisms for coordinated management of transboundary issues for the 3 priority areas. There's inadequacy, or in some cases, there's total lack of guiding instruments for the EAC region to collaborate and cooperate in these specific areas. And so that is a gap. And also inadequate financing, and always finance has always been a gap year in and out. And the fact of the matter is that regulatory agencies, especially environmental regulatory agencies, have strained budgetary allocation. And this would be because of the political influence or many other factors that you may not be able to mention at this point. But then there are also weak enforcement attribute, which is attributed to inadequate equipment and staff. So if you have no finances and you can't acquire equipment, necessary equipment, for you to be able to undertake some monitoring and also some compliance and enforcement activity, then there's a catch there, and it's a huge gap. Sometimes also the staff, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the technical know-how, and that transfer of the technical know-how to the staff sometimes is inhibited because of lack of resources. And I would give the current issue, current hot issue around the region, where every regulatory authority is grappling with the, I'll be biased a little bit on air quality. Every regional regulatory authority is battling with air quality. Others are on the at the verge where they are reviewing the regulations. Others are formulating, and sometimes when they're doing this is because maybe what they did before, actually when they try to implement it, does not work, and sometimes it might be attributed not only to lack of necessary equipment to be able to enforce it, but also sometimes to lack of technical know-how among the staff. There's also weak coordination and synergy among multilateral environmental agreements, which are related to the priority areas. And this you do know well as enforcers and those who are in day-to-day management of the environment, that some of the focal points for different mayors sometimes causes that gap because they are not like harmonized. There's no proper way for harmonizing them. And so that coordination sometimes is a challenge. And this become a real challenge in implementation, some of these things. So inadequate leadership and political commitment on environmental issues. And I'm happy that Mr. Orina did mention at some point that how then do you actually have the political buy-in? Because the case has always been environment is relegated, and sometimes they really don't take much precedence because it is not valued for them in their mind in terms of quick cash and buying. And we have had back and forth, even the current issue that is in Parliament. I don't know how far it will go, but then where the political wing would even want to control the resources, mark the boundaries for forests and such kind of things. So that is a challenge. Lack of coordinated framework to work with the private sector, civil society, and other stakeholders in environmental compliance and enforcement issues. We don't have very, very clear framework within regulatory organization, very clear framework. I stand to be corrected on how you deal with the private sector, civil society, so that you leverage on the expertise, also leverage on the resources, so that you're able to, the regulatory authority is able to actually do much better in compliance and enforcement and leverage on these resources that are available around it. And so I think there's a need for a very coordinated framework so that they engage. And I believe this is a step, like having EANECE is a step towards that. And so there's need to be, there's need to actually put a deliberate move towards this and have a documented framework. Conflicts, insecurities, and general regional political dynamics, which, as Jerry did mention, has actually also been a challenge for compliance and enforcement. And this will span from policy to implementation. And then this would beg us to ask a question, then how do we handle this so that issues of compliance and enforcement are not inhibited? Another challenge, of course, is the pandemics, like the COVID-19. It had its gain, and also it had also some challenges with it. And in it actually, on one hand, there was incapacitation in terms of compliance and enforcement because we are limited in terms of movement. And sometimes follow-up on some of the activities that are ongoing that may be injurious to the environment, especially on the 3 priority areas, might be a challenge. There's also inadequate integration of environmental issues in development plans, and not only having them in those development plans that actually guide development within maybe national and local regions, but the implementation bit. Do we even allocate resources for it? Or do we just say climate change or air quality or solid waste as a passing bit, a section on our development plan without having some allocation which is deliberately also released or to enable effective implementation? There's also inadequate mechanism for joint mobilization of funds so that we can address compliance and enforcement issues related to the 3 priority areas. Although at EAC, we through now EANECE, we are trying, this is something that a gap that's being addressed, but then it is not foolproof. So it's something that we need to think through. So inadequate research and innovation to solve challenges in key priority areas. And actually the research, there's a gap between what is being undertaken, I mean the research being taken, and the policy. So policymakers, more often than not, they actually need credible information so that they can make decisions. But because of the limited data, sometimes some of the decisions that are supposed to be made now are actually inhibited, or somehow they get a challenge. Another challenge is the segregated coordination and information exchange. This can be at national and local level governance, or national and international level governance. And what do I mean? If, for instance, we have NEM as a national body that actually manages, and it's also a regulator on issues of environment, then we have the local, like the county government at the local level. Sometimes when there is segregated coordination or information exchange is not well facilitated, then it becomes a challenge to compliance and enforcement. This also do happen for international and national levels of governance. So some of the quick recommendations, which are not silver bullet or they are not foolproof as they are, but their suggestions, is that in our review of national policies and laws, we need to try as much as possible to minimize or eliminate overlaps and conflicts in roles of institutions so that we do not have a gap in compliance and enforcement, because we will be having blame games. Who is to do this? Who is to do that? Because there's actually overlaps. And I know as regulators and seasoned regulators, you have good examples of where overlaps have actually led to non-enforcement or has inhibited compliance. So also there's a recommendation to develop laws or guidelines that enhance coordinated management of transboundary issues related to 3 priority areas, specifically for EAC. We do acknowledge that there might be some instruments or guidelines or laws internationally, but then the regional dynamics demand that we as EAC would come up with guidelines that are actually through the EAC protocols that we have, so that we can actually coordinate the management of transboundary issues which are focused on air and climate change, waste and chemicals, biodiversity. Another recommendation is there should be some enhanced allocation of adequate financing. You know, and I would want to belabor on this. This has the political aspect of it, and sometimes a lot of lobbying is needed, but it's something that needs to be done, because when the regulatory authorities are actually underfunded, then they are not able to deliver on their mandates. There's also a recommendation to facilitate technological transfer through capacity building of staff, and where we need technical expertise to enable us monitor different aspects of the environment. There's need to have capacity building, and that I do believe, as had been indicated, was some of the gains for EANECE before. Implementation and enforcement of existing legislation should actually be prioritized. In some cases, we have existing legislation, but because of the challenge of implementing them, or sometimes because of different interests, sometimes it becomes a challenge. And so is that we need to find a way through which some of this good legislation, pieces of legislation that have actually been enacted, can be implemented and be given priority. Then develop coordinated framework to work with private sector. That would be something that we need to really think about, so that as much as it's documented that EANECE is actually a platform where we have both regulatory authorities, academia, private sector, but then we really need to have a coordinated framework on how we actually leverage on these different players. And then the next recommendation is that we need an integrated approach that employs diverse policy approaches concurrently, so that we're able to address some of the challenges that we are facing when we're ensuring compliance and enforcement on those key priority areas for the next 5 years. There's also a need for EAC to harmonize and synergize objectives and outcomes of the key measures, which I did indicate, and especially for the priority areas. And then we need to actually just have a deliberate integration of environmental issues in our development plans. They should have a budget, and not only on paper, but it should also be disbursed. I know this is a tall order, but it's something that needs to be done for us to have effective regulatory authorities. So deliberate funding of research and innovation to solve compliance and enforcement. And in this, there need to be a very strong partnership between regulatory authorities and higher institutions of learning or research organization, so that they are able to leverage on the knowledge that's being generated. And at the same time, the research institutions are able to pick the problems or the challenges and research on the on real challenges that the regulatory authorities and those involved in compliance and enforcement do face. Otherwise, thank you. So at this time, maybe through Jerry, we will invite a discussion where in the discussion, the presentation, as I said, was just to spur this discussion so that we're able to actually pick out some of the challenges and also have a platform now to share how do these challenges actually play out in our day-to-day activity. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you very much, Godwin, for that precise presentation. So, colleagues, as we mentioned, these are, some of the ideas that we are having that are likely to inform the actions and activities that the network engages in over the next 4 or 5 year period. So I want to welcome any comments, questions, additions at this point in time. Feel free to raise a hand. I'll give you the floor.
Pondo?
Yes, please, Waiswa, go ahead.
Yes, I want to thank the presenter for that good presentation on the study which we did, looking at what the region is. Indeed, most of what you said is looking at what exists. The region is still grappling with a number of issues. But also, amidst all this, there are also opportunities. For instance, I'm thinking that this issue of how do we bring on board this private sector, I would think that we would tap it from the regional level, the East African Business Council. This is a powerful organ for business in East Africa. And I don't think that when they meet, environment is part of the agenda, okay? So I would think that this is an area we could think of seeing how we tap into the East African Business Council, that when we come from that level, we can also, things can also trickle down to the individual countries, but also having that East African Business Council has taken on environment as a major issue in their discussions among the stakeholders. I think that one is very, very, very important. There was the other issue of developing laws and guidelines on management of transboundary issues. What I'm aware that the protocol on environment and natural resources under East African Community has got provisions of how to manage transboundary natural resources. And I believe our own individual countries within our national laws, for instance, the National Environment Act number 5 of 2019 clearly has proper provisions of how to deal with the transboundary issues, that there is no way we can handle any activity which has transboundary impacts without having to let know of our sister of the country which is impacted. In fact, under the protocol on natural resources, where we have even EIA guidelines for EIF on a transboundary nature, they define a country of origin and a country of impact, so that if there is a natural resource which is impacted upon by any member country, so the trigger is there on how to collaborate. However, probably we could develop guidelines, but also to see how we harmonize our efforts of the efforts of EANECE and ESC, because ESC has a broader framework, and I recall very well Mr. Pondo sometime back. I think we had discussed to see how even we approach the East African Community, to see how our activities can be supported by the East African Community Secretariat. I think we had discussed that sometime back. For us, we're a network, but still we can carry on some of the activities which are discussed at a bigger level. But also still on the transboundary issues, you know that also individual countries, some of them which share borders have also got their own MOU, or how they want to handle certain natural resources. So whatever we discuss also, let's take into account what is happening at EAC, also look into what individual countries have agreed upon, but you're also aware that as members of EAC, within EAC, we also have members who are members of the Nairobi Basin Initiative. So I think we need, as we discuss on how to harmonize our transboundary issues, we need to take into account existing protocols and memorandum of understanding between individual countries so that we harmonize with all what is happening in the region. Of course, the issue of not having harmonized, you know, for instance, standards on air quality and other approaches to everything else. I think this is a very, very big issue. But one good thing is that EANECE provides us a good platform for cooperation because, as I mentioned, that once we get the CEO summit moving and we have the buy-in at that level, a number of things can start moving because they know the benefits of regional cooperation and all that. So I think that would be very useful. So those were my few comments for now. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Waiswa, for those very great comments from Uganda. I want to give the floor to Madam Jane Nyandika of NEMA Kenya. I see your hand, Jane. Please go ahead and speak. Jane Nyandika, can you hear? You need to unmute yourself to speak, please. Looks like Jane has a problem with her system, so I will skip that for now. When she's able to speak, we'll grant her the chance. But I open the floor again, colleagues, for any comments on the presentation and on any other matter that has been discussed today. Thank you. Maybe I should go. Okay, go ahead, Madam Salome, please.
Thank you, and thank you for that good report on our capacity assessment. I was thinking that maybe we need to. I saw like we have quite a number of challenges, and I was thinking maybe as we revive this network, we look at the low-lying fruits that we can tackle as we move on. So within the challenges and the recommendations we have, we look at the few that we can start them off. And then the issue of funding. I know we have tried a number of times to maybe institutionalize this, the network within our own programs, but I was also thinking, would we explore issues of contribution, membership, contribution, maybe individually, our institutions. I know Waiswa also said something like that, ways of mobilizing resources so that when we don't have resources, then the network kind of goes to sleep. Are there ways we can explore whether we can have some membership fees? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Salome, for those comments and that particular thought. And again, you know, this is really, you know, food for thought. And we hope that, you know, we can discuss among ourselves and have some recommendations around, you know, for example, the membership structure, whether we are going to have some membership fees, how do we institutionalize within the various agencies and all that. So very good for that. Thank you. Let me drift a bit to our colleagues at NEMC in Tanzania. I know there have been at least 3 or 4 participants from NEMC joining today. So any thoughts thus far from NEG without, you know, any particular order? We have Gabriel from Burundi. If you are able to speak, kindly, if you have any comments so far up till now. Not able to, so I open it, I throw it back again to the floor. We have a couple of minutes before our end time. Of course, we are happy to end it a little earlier, but I want to open it up once more in case there are one or two, pending issues that somebody would like to raise. If not, I will take it back to you, Godwin, for some reflections on those comments from Madam Salome, as well as from Moiswa from Uganda.
Thank you, Jerry. Maybe before the reflections, I thought that this was also a good opportunity for sharing on some of the challenges that might have not been captured, but also the experiences, how we handle different experiences. I know we'll create such forum later on, but then just a quick response or some reflections on, there was a very brilliant suggestion of looking at what are the low-hanging fruits, what can we achieve and through which model, and the easiest way. And I think that will be, it's a very brilliant idea, and we think we'll look into that as also part of EANECE to see what can we start with, and then how do we propel it in such a way that we're able to address some of our challenges with, let's say, minimum resources, but actually you have double benefits. And that was well taken. Then I also want to thank Waiswa for noting that there are actual protocols for transboundary, and the key issue is about then what challenges really are faced actually in the implementation of this because of different interests within the member countries. And I also take cognizance of how then can we tap from, let's say, the Regional Business Council. How then do we push agenda of environment, and specifically maybe the 3 priority areas for the next 5 years, so that we're able to cut the air of the Business Council and then have the trickling down, so that there's some benefits that may be harnessed. And I think all these are very brilliant suggestions. So Jerry, I think those are my few reflections on this.
Thank you very much, Godwin, for that. Is there any other burning question before we close the session for today, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen? So if not, then allow me.
Ofondo.
Yes, please,
Ofondo,
go ahead.
I think I've just seen a chart from Jen,
okay,
which is talking about, as we move forward, you see that some countries have banned single-use plastics, others own that maybe much as we are not an enforcer as an organ, as EANECE, but we should be speaking this message to the other authorities, okay? That we can't talking about only, for instance, air quality. When you have a big monster, you know that it is one of the things which are coming up on the UNEA agenda, upcoming meeting of UNEA agenda, the issue of plastics. So I think it's one of those priority areas we should also be focusing on, because there is a lot of money these guys are going to put in that area of plastic. So I think it's one of those areas also we need to focus on. I thank you.
Thanks very much, Waiswa, for that, and for highlighting that quick comment also from Jane. Indeed, chemicals and waste is broadly, an area, but if you go into waste, then plastic waste has been identified as a problem area within the strategic plan. And those of you who were able to attend last week's webinar that delved on this particular subject, then you realize, there was a lot of interest and also insights and experiences shared, from Uganda, from Kenya, from Tanzania, from Rwanda as well. And, going forward, just based on the results of the last webinar on plastics waste, then we think, these are some of the things that we need to focus on. And we will take that comment, seriously. Going forward, even as we figure out, how to put together a work plan for the next, planning period, these are some of the things that we cherish, and we thank you, for that comment. Any other final thoughts, comments before we close? Tanzania hasn't spoken today. Nem, any comments from your side? Burundi, any comments or questions? So I will take silence to mean we are good to go today. So colleagues, just as you may have noted from the invitation, this session ends now, but tomorrow again from 2:30 to 4:30 p.m., same link like today. Please join and as many of you that have come today, and encourage more colleagues from Kenya, from Uganda, from Tanzania, from Burundi. Only Rwanda was not represented today. We hope we can catch them tomorrow as well. Because tomorrow is really, you know, the crux of this, that we have come from where we came with the network. We have had our challenges. We have dusted ourselves and picked up, and now we are ready to take off. But you, especially as the environmental regulators, are actually, you know, the real owners of this effort and of this network. Non-governmental players like us can only play a facilitative, you know, role, like, you know, hosting these kinds of forums. So tomorrow is really, you know, when we decide the direction that the network should take in terms of its governance, in terms of membership and all that. So kindly mobilize your colleagues to attend. We hope that by the end of tomorrow, we shall have a very, very clear way forward in terms of where you as key participants in this want the network to go. And that then will be helpful, you know, having set up a proper and well-representative governance framework that then we can all work together to put together programs that can then take us back to where we were with the network some years ago. So with that, allow me to bring the session to an end today. Thank you very much, colleagues in Tanzania and NEM for joining, colleagues at the Burundi Pollution Control Agency, colleagues in NEMA Uganda, and colleagues in NEMA Kenya, as well as, you know, other participants who are able to join. Thanks so much, and we look forward again to seeing you for the second and final session of the conference tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Nairobi time, 4:30. So thank you very much, and have a lovely evening to all of you.